Jonathan Moore stood at the top of his grand staircase, looking out over the vast expanse of his luxurious home. His mansion, perched on the edge of a hill, looked like something straight out of a movie. It had every modern convenience money could buy, a grand marble foyer, a sprawling library filled with rare books, and rooms decorated with the finest artwork. It was the life that most people could only dream of, but to Jonathan, it was simply a place to work, to keep his empire running smoothly. There was no time for anything else. His life had been consumed by business for as long as he could remember. As the CEO of a leading tech company, he had sacrificed everything: his time, his relationships, and even his own happiness to build his fortune. His success had come at a cost, and that cost was his family. The mansion, though beautiful, felt empty. He had everything anyone could want, except for the one thing that mattered most: a close, meaningful relationship with his daughter, Lucy. Lucy was unlike any other child. She was born with a severe disability that left her unable to communicate verbally or move as other children could. Her small, fragile body required constant care and attention. Jonathan loved her deeply, but he felt powerless. He was a successful businessman, but when it came to caring for Lucy, he felt helpless. Despite all the money in the world, he couldn't fix her condition, and he couldn't make her feel normal. It was something that gnawed at him, especially since his wife had passed away when Lucy was just a toddler. Jonathan was left to raise their daughter alone. The house was always quiet when Jonathan was home. It wasn't that Lucy wasn't there, but her presence was different. She couldn't run around the house like other kids or make noise with her laughter. The silence was heavy, and Jonathan often felt like a stranger in his own home. He would try to spend time with her, but it was difficult. Lucy's condition made it hard for him to connect with her. He tried to engage with her, but she didn't respond in ways he could understand. It made him frustrated and sad, but he didn't know what else to do. Jonathan knew that he needed help. He wasn't equipped to take care of Lucy by himself, so he hired a live-in maid to help care for her. Maria was a woman in her mid-30s who had come highly recommended by a trusted agency. She was from a small town, a hard-working woman with a soft-spoken nature and a heart full of kindness. She had experience working with children with disabilities and was eager to help Jonathan and his daughter. Maria moved in with her young son, and soon, she became a steady presence in the house. She didn't just clean the house or cook meals, she took the time to care for Lucy in a way that Jonathan had never been able to. It wasn't just about meeting her physical needs, it was about connecting with her emotionally. Maria knew how to calm Lucy when she became agitated, how to make her smile with just a gentle touch or a soft word. She knew when Lucy wanted something and could read her subtle cues, something Jonathan had never been able to do. Jonathan was amazed at how easily Maria seemed to understand Lucy. He had hired her for practical reasons, but he quickly saw that Maria was more than just a caregiver. She was a lifeline for his daughter. Over time, Maria and Lucy developed a bond that Jonathan could never have imagined. They shared quiet moments together, with Maria reading to her, holding her hand, or simply sitting beside her in silence. Lucy seemed to respond to Maria in a way she never had with Jonathan. It was as if she could sense that Maria wasn't just there out of duty, but out of genuine love and care. For Jonathan, this was a bittersweet realization. He was grateful for Maria's help, but he also felt a pang of jealousy. Why couldn't he be the one to connect with his daughter in this way? Why was it so easy for Maria to do what he had struggled with for so long? He loved Lucy, of course, but he had never been able to truly reach her. Despite these feelings, Jonathan didn't voice his concerns. He convinced himself that it was for the best. Maria had a gift, and Lucy was thriving under her care. After all, Jonathan couldn't be everything to his daughter. He had his company to run, meetings to attend, and deals to close. It was impossible to be both a successful CEO and a full-time father, especially to a child with such complex needs. Yet, despite the practical nature of the arrangement, there was an underlying sense of distance between Jonathan and Maria. He often found himself watching her with Lucy, noting the way Maria's eyes softened when she looked at his daughter, the tenderness in her touch. It wasn't just professional care, it was love. And Jonathan couldn't help but feel a growing unease. He wasn't sure why, but something about their bond unsettled him. On one particular afternoon, Jonathan returned home early from a meeting. He had been in a hurry to finish up his work and had decided to come back to the house for a few hours to rest. As he walked through the halls of the mansion, he heard soft voices from the living room. He paused, not wanting to interrupt whatever moment was happening, but the voices drew him closer. He peeked around the corner of the doorway and froze. There, in the middle of the living room, Maria was sitting on the floor with Lucy in her lap. Maria was hugging her gently, whispering soothing words into Lucy's ear. It was an intimate moment, one that Jonathan had never witnessed before. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged his daughter like that. He stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching. His heart ached as he saw how peaceful Lucy looked in Maria's arms, her head resting against Maria's shoulder. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jonathan was filled with a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude, jealousy, confusion. He had never seen his daughter so relaxed, so calm. It was as though Maria had unlocked something inside Lucy that Jonathan had never been able to reach. The scene before him felt so raw and real, yet Jonathan couldn't bring himself to step forward, to break the moment. He remained hidden, silently observing, feeling as though he were intruding on something private. But in that moment, Jonathan realized that Maria wasn't just a maid. She was something more: a caregiver, a friend, perhaps even a mother figure to Lucy. And for the first time, Jonathan wondered if his daughter had found something in Maria that she had never found in him. As he stood there in the doorway, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life was about to change. Jonathan couldn't shake the image of Maria holding his daughter in her arms. It replayed in his mind over and over again as he tried to focus on his work. The image of Lucy, so calm and at peace, nestled against Maria, was unsettling. It felt like an intrusion into something sacred, something he wasn't part of. At times, he would catch himself staring off into space, lost in thought, trying to figure out what had triggered such a strong reaction. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had he reacted the way he did? Was it jealousy? Or was it something deeper, something he didn't want to admit to himself? He had always prided himself on being in control. As a businessman, Jonathan had built his fortune from the ground up. Every decision, every move he made, was calculated. He didn't let emotions cloud his judgment, and he certainly didn't let anyone get too close. His life had been defined by precision and distance. Yet, here he was, feeling like a stranger in his own home, unable to understand his own emotions. The next few days were filled with unease. Jonathan would walk through the house, passing by Lucy's room, where he would hear the soft sound of Maria talking to her. He would glance through the door, and there they would be: Maria sitting on the floor with Lucy, reading a book to her, or simply holding her hand. The bond between them was undeniable. There was a warmth in their connection that Jonathan had never felt with his daughter. He tried not to let it bother him, but the discomfort was always there, like a knot in his stomach. It wasn't that Jonathan didn't care for his daughter, he loved her deeply. But he had always struggled to connect with her in the way Maria seemed to. His daughter's disability made it difficult for him to know how to reach her. She didn't speak or show emotion the way other children did. Her small, fragile body was a constant reminder of her vulnerability, and Jonathan often felt like he was walking on eggshells around her. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to make her happy in the same way Maria could. Maria's patience and understanding of Lucy's needs seemed effortless, and that was something Jonathan couldn't quite grasp. Maria had an innate ability to calm Lucy when she was upset. There were times when Jonathan would hear Lucy crying from her room, and without fail, Maria would be there, soothing her with her soft voice, making her feel safe again. Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he had been able to do that. His attempts were always met with silence or frustration. It left him wondering if there was something wrong with him, or if he was simply not cut out for this kind of fatherhood. The distance between him and his daughter grew every day. Lucy's condition made it hard for her to show affection or respond to her father's efforts in any meaningful way. Jonathan wanted to believe that she loved him, but it was hard to feel that love when she couldn't express it. It was as if they were two strangers living in the same house, bound by blood but separated by an invisible wall. Jonathan couldn't help but compare his relationship with Lucy to the one Maria had. It was clear that Maria had found a way to connect with her, to make her feel understood, while Jonathan was left on the outside looking in. Despite his feelings, Jonathan never questioned Maria's loyalty or her professionalism. He knew that she was doing her job and doing it well. She was kind, respectful, and worked tirelessly to take care of Lucy. But that didn't make the jealousy go away. It gnawed at him every time he saw them together. There was something so tender in their interactions, something so real and genuine, that Jonathan felt like an outsider in his own home. He couldn't help but wonder if he was failing as a father. One evening, Jonathan found himself sitting in his study, his eyes scanning the documents in front of him but not really seeing them. His mind kept drifting back to Maria and Lucy. He thought about how close they had become, how Maria seemed to understand his daughter in ways he never could. The thought made him uneasy. It was almost as if Maria had replaced him, like she had taken on the role of a mother figure in Lucy's life, something Jonathan could never be. He wanted to be more for Lucy. He wanted to be the father she needed, but it was as if he was always a step behind. That evening, after finishing his work, Jonathan decided to take a walk around the property to clear his mind. The mansion sat on acres of land, with a beautiful garden and a small lake in the back. As he walked through the grounds, the cool evening air filled his lungs, but it didn't bring him peace. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He had built this life, this empire, but it felt empty. The house was too big, the silence too loud. He had everything he could want except for the one thing that mattered most, a connection with his daughter. As Jonathan walked by the lake, he found himself thinking about his late wife. She had passed away when Lucy was only 2, leaving Jonathan to raise their daughter alone. At the time, he had been devastated, but he had thrown himself into his work to cope with the grief. He never really allowed himself to mourn her loss. Instead, he focused on the business, on building his empire. Now, looking back, he realized that he had neglected the most important thing in his life, his daughter. Lucy had never known her mother, and Jonathan had never been able to fill that gap. He had tried, of course. He had hired the best caregivers and sent Lucy to the best schools, but none of it had made a difference. Lucy still struggled. She still didn't communicate, still didn't respond the way other children did. Jonathan knew that no amount of money could change that. The thought hit him harder than he expected. He had built his fortune, but he had failed at the one thing that truly mattered. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Jonathan could no longer ignore the discomfort he felt whenever he saw Maria with Lucy. He knew he had to do something about it, but he wasn't sure what. Part of him wanted to confront Maria, to ask her why she had such a close bond with his daughter, but another part of him was afraid. Afraid of what he might learn, afraid of what it might mean for his relationship with Lucy. Jonathan had always prided himself on being in control, but in this moment, he felt completely powerless. He couldn't fix his daughter's condition. He couldn't make her speak, couldn't make her walk, couldn't make her love him the way he wanted her to. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he had taken for granted. He had focused so much on his success, on building his business, that he had forgotten what it truly meant to be a father. And so, Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. The life he had built was no longer enough. He had to figure out what kind of father he wanted to be and whether or not he could find a way to connect with his daughter before it was too late. Jonathan could feel the weight of the growing distance between himself and his daughter. Each day, as he moved through the house, it seemed as though Lucy had become more and more of a stranger to him. He watched her from afar, seeing her in the quiet moments with Maria, and he couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own family. Maria's bond with Lucy was undeniable, and it stirred up emotions in Jonathan that he had never allowed himself to feel. There was a growing sense of jealousy, but it wasn't just jealousy of their closeness, it was a deeper fear that he might never truly connect with his daughter in the way that Maria had. Despite his wealth, Jonathan knew that there was no amount of money that could buy him the connection that Maria seemed to have with Lucy. He had tried everything to help her, but nothing seemed to work. He had hired the best doctors, the most qualified therapists, but Lucy's condition had remained unchanged. The truth was, Jonathan had spent so much time trying to fix the problem with money and resources that he had neglected the most important part of being a father, emotional connection. It wasn't just that Maria had found a way to connect with Lucy, she had found a way to see Lucy for who she truly was. Jonathan had always seen his daughter's disability first, and it had become a barrier between them. But Maria didn't see her as a broken child who needed to be fixed, she saw her as a beautiful, unique soul who just needed to be understood. Maria didn't focus on Lucy's disability, she focused on her strengths, her small victories, and the moments where Lucy's personality shone through. It was something Jonathan had never been able to do. He had been too focused on what was wrong with Lucy that he couldn't see what was right. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Jonathan came home early, hoping to get a moment to himself. But as he walked through the hallway, he heard laughter coming from the living room. It was a sound he hadn't heard in a long time, genuine, unforced laughter. Curious, he followed the sound and peeked around the corner of the room. Maria was sitting on the couch with Lucy beside her, and they were both laughing. Maria had managed to make Lucy giggle, something Jonathan hadn't seen in ages. Lucy's face lit up with joy as she giggled, her eyes sparkling for the first time in what felt like forever. Maria was making funny faces, and Lucy responded with small bursts of laughter. Jonathan stood frozen, watching them, unsure of what to do. It was a simple moment, but it struck him deeply. There was something so pure and natural in the way Maria interacted with his daughter. It wasn't forced, it wasn't calculated, it was real. Jonathan stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, unable to speak. The laughter of his daughter echoed in his ears, but it felt like a distant sound, as though he wasn't part of it. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by the noise of business deals, phone calls, and meetings that he had forgotten what it meant to simply be present with someone, to enjoy the small, simple moments. Watching Maria with Lucy made him realize just how much he had missed. But instead of feeling relief or gratitude, Jonathan felt a deep sense of frustration. Why couldn't he be the one to make his daughter laugh? Why was it so easy for Maria to reach Lucy, to make her smile, while he struggled to even get a response? He had the wealth, the resources, and the best therapists money could buy, yet he still couldn't seem to break through to his own daughter. The thought gnawed at him, eating away at his confidence. The more Jonathan thought about it, the more he began to feel a sense of guilt. He had been so focused on his work, so absorbed in his business empire, that he had missed the most important thing, being there for his daughter. He had assumed that money and resources could solve everything, but they hadn't. They couldn't fix the emptiness he felt inside, the loneliness that lingered in the corners of his home. The mansion, which once felt like a symbol of his success, now felt like a cage. The silence, the loneliness, it all weighed heavily on him. Over the next few days, Jonathan found himself retreating more and more into his own thoughts. He stopped attending meetings as often and began spending more time at home, watching Maria and Lucy interact. He couldn't help it. He needed to understand what was happening between them, why Maria was able to reach Lucy when he couldn't. It wasn't just curiosity, it was desperation. He wanted to find a way to connect with his daughter, to break through the wall that had formed between them. Maria, for her part, remained unaware of Jonathan's growing obsession. She continued to care for Lucy with the same dedication and love she had always shown. She didn't think twice about the bond she had with the young girl. To her, it was natural. She didn't view her role as anything extraordinary, it was simply what she had always done for children, especially those who needed extra care. Maria had a quiet, nurturing nature, one that didn't demand attention or acknowledgement. She didn't seek validation for the care she provided. She just did it because it was who she was. But Jonathan could no longer ignore the tension that had been building between them. It wasn't just about his daughter anymore, it was about his own insecurities, his own feelings of inadequacy. He didn't want to feel like an outsider in his own home, but that was exactly how he felt. The more he watched Maria with Lucy, the more he realized how little he knew about what was happening in his daughter's world. He had been so focused on fixing her, on trying to make her normal, that he hadn't taken the time to understand her for who she was. One afternoon, Jonathan found himself sitting in his office, staring at the computer screen but not really seeing it. His thoughts were consumed by Maria and Lucy, and the sense of inadequacy that had been growing inside him. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't keep going like this, watching from the sidelines as someone else took the place he should have filled. But he didn't know what that something was. The realization hit him hard, he had been failing Lucy. Not because he hadn't tried, but because he had been trying to solve her problems without truly understanding them. He had been too focused on his own success, his own achievements, that he had overlooked the simple truth that what his daughter needed most was love, patience, and understanding, things that didn't come with a price tag. Things that couldn't be bought, no matter how much money he had. Jonathan knew that if he wanted to change his relationship with Lucy, he would have to start with himself. He would have to let go of his pride and his assumptions, and open himself up to the possibility that he didn't have all the answers. It wasn't about fixing Lucy, it was about accepting her, understanding her, and learning to communicate with her in the ways that mattered most. Jonathan had spent days, even weeks, wrestling with his thoughts, his emotions, and the undeniable tension he felt in his own home. He couldn't shake the image of Maria holding Lucy, laughing with her, comforting her in ways that felt so effortless, yet so foreign to him. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt like he was on the outside looking in, not just at his daughter's life, but at his own. The discomfort he had once pushed aside was now a constant presence in his mind. It wasn't just about his daughter's disability anymore, it was about his failure to truly connect with her. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized something: he had been too focused on being a provider, on fixing things with money and solutions, when what his daughter really needed was his presence, his time, and his understanding. It wasn't just a realization, it was a shift. It was like a door had been opened in his mind, and for the first time, he could see things clearly. He had been so focused on being a successful businessman, so absorbed in his career, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. He had pushed his daughter away without even realizing it. But now, Jonathan knew that it was time to change. The decision to confront Maria didn't come easily. Jonathan had always prided himself on being in control, on keeping his emotions in check. But now, he realized that he needed to let go of that control. He had to understand what was happening between Maria and Lucy, but more importantly, he had to understand his own role in his daughter's life. It wasn't enough to be the man who wrote the checks or made the decisions, he had to be the father, the one who showed up, who listened, who cared in ways that went beyond providing for her physical needs. One afternoon, Jonathan found himself standing in front of the door to Maria's room. His heart was beating faster than he had expected. He had never been nervous about confronting anyone in his life, but this was different. This was personal. He wasn't just confronting an employee, he was confronting the deep-seated feelings of inadequacy that had been building inside him for so long. The thought of talking to Maria about the bond she shared with his daughter was overwhelming. What if she didn't understand? What if she thought he was questioning her intentions? What if she was offended? Taking a deep breath, Jonathan knocked on the door. "Maria, do you have a moment?" he called, his voice a little shakier than he would have liked. Maria opened the door, her usual warm smile greeting him. "Of course, Mr. Moore. Is everything okay?" Jonathan hesitated, unsure of how to begin. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say in his mind, but now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed to escape him. He looked at Maria, at the kindness in her eyes, and he realized that he was no longer just talking to an employee. He was talking to someone who had become an important part of his daughter's life, and perhaps even his own. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something," Jonathan began, his voice steadying as he spoke. "It's about Lucy. And, well, about the way things have been around here." Maria's expression softened. "What's on your mind, Mr. Moore?" Jonathan took a deep breath, the words coming out faster now that he had started. "I've been noticing how much time you've been spending with Lucy. And I've also noticed how close you've become. I guess I've been feeling a little unsure about my own place in all of this." Maria listened quietly, her face remaining calm. Jonathan's words hung in the air, thick with the weight of his confession. He felt vulnerable, exposed. This was the moment where he could either pull back and stay in the safety of his silence, or he could confront the reality of his situation. "I've been struggling with my relationship with Lucy," Jonathan continued. "I've done everything I thought was right, hired the best doctors, brought in the best therapists, but I've never really been able to connect with her. Not the way you have. And I guess I'm jealous. I'm jealous of how you're able to reach her, to make her smile, to make her feel safe. I want that, too. I want to be the father she needs." Maria's eyes softened further, and she took a step closer to Jonathan. There was no judgment in her gaze, just understanding. "Mr. Moore, I know this must be difficult for you. But you have to understand, you're not alone in this. You don't have to do it all by yourself. Lucy doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be there, to be present." Jonathan's chest tightened as he listened. "But I've been trying. I've been so focused on making everything right for her, but I feel like I'm failing her." Maria shook her head gently. "You're not failing, Jonathan. You're just trying too hard to fix things that can't be fixed with money or solutions. Lucy doesn't need you to fix her. She just needs you to love her, to accept her, to be with her. That's enough. I know it's hard, but you're doing more than you think. You've provided for her, given her the best opportunities. But the most important thing is your love. That's what she needs." Jonathan's throat tightened as he absorbed her words. He had never truly understood the depth of what Maria was saying until now. All this time, he had been looking for answers in the wrong places. He had been trying to buy solutions, to fix problems with resources, when all his daughter really needed was his love and attention. "I've been so focused on what I thought I needed to do, but I've been missing the most important thing," Jonathan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been missing her." Maria smiled softly, her voice gentle. "It's never too late, Jonathan. You can still be the father she needs. You just have to start being present, start seeing her for who she is, not for what you want her to be." Jonathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't an immediate solution, but it was the beginning of a shift. He realized now that the connection he sought with Lucy wasn't something that could be forced. It would come with time, with patience, and with a willingness to let go of the need to control everything. It would come from being there, from showing up every day, from loving her in ways that didn't require fixing anything. "I don't know where to start," Jonathan confessed, his voice full of uncertainty. "But I know I have to start somewhere." Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "The first step is understanding that you don't have to have all the answers. Just be there for her. She's already waiting for you." Jonathan nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He had started this conversation unsure of what to expect, but now he felt like he had found the first piece of the puzzle. He didn't have to be perfect, he just had to be present. And that was enough. As he left Maria's room, Jonathan felt a new sense of hope stirring inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. A path toward being the father Lucy needed, and the person he had always wanted to be. This expanded version of Part 4 dives deeper into Jonathan's emotional breakthrough and his conversation with Maria, marking a pivotal moment in the story. It reflects his growing understanding of what it truly means to be a father to Lucy and the beginning of his emotional transformation. Let me know if you'd like any changes. The days that followed were a turning point in Jonathan's life. There was a subtle shift in the way he moved through his own home. He was more present, more mindful, and he had begun to look at Lucy differently. Before, he had always seen her disability, the challenges she faced, and the limitations that came with it. But now, he saw her for who she was, a young girl with unique needs, with hopes, with feelings, and with a world of potential that he had never truly understood. It wasn't an overnight change, and it wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, moments when Jonathan felt like he was failing again, but he kept pushing forward. He had made a promise to himself, and more importantly, to his daughter, that he would no longer be a passive observer in her life. He had to be active, involved, and present, not just for her, but for himself, too. One morning, Jonathan decided to take Lucy out for a walk in the garden. It had been a while since they had done anything together like that. The garden outside the mansion was vast, with winding paths, colorful flowers, and large, ancient trees. It was the perfect place for quiet reflection or peaceful walks. Jonathan had always assumed that Lucy wouldn't be able to appreciate the beauty of it, that the garden was just another feature of the house that she didn't need. But Maria had changed his perspective. She had shown him that it wasn't about whether Lucy could walk through the garden on her own or whether she could say something about the flowers. It was about sharing the experience, about making the moment meaningful. Jonathan wheeled Lucy outside, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. He walked slowly, taking in the bright sunlight and the warmth of the day. Lucy's wheelchair rolled smoothly along the path, and Jonathan noticed the way her eyes seemed to focus on the flowers they passed. He had never paid attention to that before, but now, he could see how engaged she was with the world around her. It wasn't just about the things she couldn't do, it was about the things she could experience. They reached a bench by a large oak tree, and Jonathan carefully positioned the wheelchair so Lucy could see the wide view of the garden. Sitting beside her, Jonathan talked softly, telling her about the trees, the birds, and the flowers. He didn't expect a response, but he didn't mind. What mattered was that he was there with her, that they were sharing the moment together. It felt different from before. There was no rush, no agenda, just the two of them, existing in the same space. Jonathan's voice was calm and steady, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly connecting with her. It was a small moment, but to Jonathan, it was a revelation. He had spent so much time worrying about what he wasn't doing for Lucy that he had forgotten the importance of simply being with her. The walk in the garden wasn't about fixing anything, it was about sharing the world with her in the simplest way possible. He realized that he didn't have to try to change her or make her something she wasn't. All she needed was for him to be there, to offer his love and his presence. As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan continued to build his relationship with Lucy. He spent more time with her, engaging in simple activities that he had never thought to do before. They would sit together in the living room, listening to music, reading books, or even just watching the world go by through the large windows of the house. Jonathan wasn't just a figure in the background anymore, he was an active part of Lucy's world. The change didn't go unnoticed by Maria. She could see the shift in Jonathan, how he was starting to let go of his fear and his doubts. At first, she had wondered if this was just a phase, something Jonathan would tire of after a while. But as time passed, she realized that Jonathan was genuinely committed to being a better father to Lucy. He wasn't trying to fix her, he was simply trying to understand her, to be there for her in ways that mattered. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Jonathan found himself sitting with Maria in the living room, the weight of the day behind him. He looked at her, his face reflecting a mix of gratitude and reflection. "Thank you," he said quietly. Maria raised an eyebrow, surprised. "For what?" "For showing me how to be a father," Jonathan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I knew what I was doing before. I thought I could fix things with money and resources. But I was wrong. I wasn't really there for Lucy. I was so focused on solving problems that I missed the most important part, just being present for her." Maria smiled softly, a warmth in her eyes. "You've always been there for her, Jonathan. You just needed to find your way back to her. It's not about being perfect. It's about loving her for who she is, and I can see you doing that now." Jonathan nodded slowly. He had learned so much from Maria, not just about his daughter, but about himself. He had spent so many years buried in his work, assuming that being a good father meant providing everything for his daughter, that he had missed the emotional connection that was the foundation of any relationship. But now, he understood. He didn't need to be perfect, and he didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was showing up every day, being there for his daughter, and accepting her for who she was. Over the next few months, Jonathan continued to grow closer to Lucy. Their bond deepened, and while Lucy still couldn't communicate in the traditional sense, Jonathan began to understand her better. He learned the subtle ways she communicated through her eyes, her touch, her small gestures. There was a richness to their relationship that Jonathan had never expected, and it filled the empty spaces he hadn't even realized were there. One day, as they sat in the garden together, Jonathan looked at his daughter with a sense of peace. The connection they shared wasn't defined by words or actions, it was defined by love, by time spent together, and by the simple act of being there for each other. Jonathan realized that, in a way, this was the most important thing he had ever done in his life. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Jonathan knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He was no longer just a businessman or a provider, he was a father, and that was enough. Maria had taught him something invaluable: love wasn't about fixing everything. Sometimes, love was simply about being there, about accepting others for who they were, and about finding joy in the quiet moments that often went unnoticed. And in that realization, Jonathan found the peace he had been searching for all along.